This video will cover how to run a policy using schedules with Impact 710. During this video, I will cover the Knowledge Center links, a couple of pre-steps before the task, then the actual steps running a policy using a schedule, followed by some troubleshooting. So let's start with the link to the IBM Knowledge Center to find the task for running policies using the schedule. If you're going to find it, you go to IBM Support Knowledge Center, and then you can either select the product here, Impact, or since we know the task, we can just search for it here. It comes up with a bunch of different options. Here's version 6, version 7.3, here's 7.5. If I click on it, the link's broke, but I can manually find it because now I'm under NetCool Impact. If I go under Policies and then find Schedule Policies and then running policies using a schedule. Okay, now for this task, running policies using a schedule, there's 8 steps. Each step has subtasks, and those subtasks are linked. If you click on them, it'll give you the subtask, and then you can go back. So we're going to start with creating a schedule, then creating an internal data schedule, and so forth. Let's go back to the presentation. That was the Knowledge Center link to the task. There's some pre-task steps. You actually have to have a policy before you can put it into a schedule. So first I'm going to create a simple policy. I'm going to call it Simple Policy. All this policy is a log statement that says, if you see this message, the schedule worked. Okay, the other thing you might want to do is to create a new project. In my example, I'm going to call my project Project 1. Let's go over to the actual Impact system. Okay, well, you've got data models, policies, services, all at the top. And over here is where your projects are. Most people work with global, but when you work with global, when you're looking at, say, policies, you have all those lists. You work with data models, you get a big long list. When you work with services, you get a big long list. In order to make it a little bit easier to view, we're going to get rid of the things we don't want by creating a project. And I've already created this project, but you can edit the project also. This is how it works. So project 1, if I want data sources, I can pick from the set of data sources that I have and move them over to project members. And in this case, for data sources, I'm going to move internal and schedule. For policies, I'm going to move the policy I just created, Simple Policy. I'm also going to move over Top Act Policy. We'll get to that later. And under services, I'm going to move over the default policy activator and the policy logger. So we'll close that, and you can see under data model I have 2, internal and schedule. Under policy I have 2, Simple Policy and Top Policy. And services I have default policy activator and policy logger. Alright, let's go back to the presentation. And we're going to start with step 1, create a schedule data type. You're going to go to the data model, find schedule, right click it, click new data type. Then you're going to enter the new data type name, which in my case is going to be DT Policy Scheduler. and then I'm going to click the save icon. That's all there is to do with step 1, creating a schedule data type. And the results are that under the data model schedule, I have a new data type called DT policy scheduler. Alright, let's look at this live. Data model schedule. It's already created, but we can edit it. You can see I called it data type name, I called it DT policy scheduler, and all I did was click this save, and it ended up here. So step 1's pretty simple. Create an internal data type that represents each policy as a task. And this is similar to what we did with step 1. Instead of schedule, we're going to use the internal data model. We're going to right click on it. We're going to pick new data type. Then we're going to name it DT underscore internal task. And this time, before we save it, we have another step. We're going to click the new button here. We're going to create a new field property. You are going to enter a unique ID in the ID field, which is either task name or policy name. So all you got to do is fill in this ID, which is marked in red here, and click OK. I'm going to put in policy name and click OK. The result is going to fill in the other items. So the ID, I put policy name, and when I clicked OK, it filled in the field name as policy name. The format was already string. The display name is policy name. And then I can use this pull down in the display name field, and it will also say policy name. Now I can save it, so I click the save icon, and the result is the internal data model now has a new data type called DT internal data task. So let's look at this. So we already did the schedule. In step 2, we're going to do the internal data model. So we right click on it to click new, but since we already have it created, we're going to right click on it and edit it. And I named it DT internal task. And then I click this new, and I put in the word policy name and clicked OK. And what happened is it created policy name all across here. And then the display, I just click policy name to match it, click save, and it ended up right here. So we've done step 1 and 2, and all we did was create 2 different data types, one for internal, one for schedule. Let's go back to the presentation. We're going to move on to step 3. Alright, we're going to stick with internal. This time we're going to create a data item. So if we click on the new data type we created and we right click it, we're going to select view data item. If there are no data items created, you'll see this, which is currently there are no data items for the data type DT internal task. So we're going to click this new icon. That's going to bring up this window here, and we need to fill in two fields, the key field and the policy name field. In the policy name field, that's where we're going to put the name of the policy we want to schedule. Now remember, I called it simple policy, so I'll write it there. And then the key field has to be unique, so just to make sure it's unique, it could be the same as simple policy, but just to make it unique, we'll put the word key in front of it with an underscore, and then we'll save it right here. The result will look like this. The key field will be key simple policy, the policy name will be simple policy, and this is the new data item. So let's see that. Internal, right click, view data item. Didn't say that there aren't any, so I don't need to click new. Instead, I need to edit this one. Okay, so let's edit it. And then I just saved it. I can move back over. So that's done. So now the internal data type has the simple policy assigned to it. Let's go back to the presentation. Step 3 is done. We'll move on to 4. Under schedule, we're going to click on the data type we just made, and then we're going to right click it and say view data items. If there are none, it will say currently there are no data items for data type DT policy scheduler. I'm going to click this new button. It'll bring up this new screen here. I want to name my new schedule name daily scheduled task. I can write in a description, and then I have to click this configure member so that the schedule member will display. So again, I put in the schedule name, I put in a description, and then I click configure member. This will pull up the internal data item, data type, and it will also pull in the date item, which is simple policy, and I can move that over. And once I move it over, I will save it. Let's go to the demo. Data model, schedule, and the data type that we have, view data items. There already is one created, so I don't have to click new, but if I want, or writing this, I would click new. Instead, I'll show you in the edit. I had daily schedule task, I put in a description, and then I clicked configure members. This was blank, but it pulled in the internal data type. If it didn't, I could select it, but it's right here. And then it actually fills in the available member with simple policy, and then I just click on it and move it over, and then save it. Okay, that's the end of 4. But the next step is to do the time range. Or here, specify the time range for each task. Alright, so you want to select this new icon. The time range is either going to be daily, weekly, or absolute. I'm going to pick daily. You also need to pick a time zone, which down here I picked American New York. And then the start time, it's a 24-hour clock, so it's 3:25, and the end time is 4:25. Then you're going to save it, and then it will give you a time range on the task that we created. Now, if the time range is actually active, this on-call status will be green. If it's not active, it will be red. The name that we gave the scheduled time was daily scheduled task. This is going to be a key piece in the next step, which is step 6. We'll get to that. The current time now is 12 o'clock, so therefore it's red. But let's edit it. If I picked 11, since it's 12 o'clock, and I picked 13 for 1 o'clock. So between 11 and 1, which that's now 12 o'clock, and I save it, move over, status turns to green. Okay, so we're ready to go then. But the last step is to write a top schedule policy. And if I write a top schedule policy, it gives you an example which you can cut and paste into a policy. And these are the 2 pieces you need to change the name on. Everything else should work fine without making any changes. So go to policies. This is what we're working on. So top act policy, I get the data type from the very first step we did, which is DT policy scheduler, and I get the key from step 5, which we just finished, which is daily scheduled task. And then I move this active null task policy name line inside an if-else statement, so that if the time is active, policy will run, and if it were outside that time range, then it would be the else and no policy would run. Writing the policy schedule. So data type, get from step 1. The key gets from step 5. And this line right here was the one I put inside the if-else statement. DT policy scheduler came from step 1, which was right here. We created the data type for schedule. And daily scheduled task you get from right here, the data item. Okay? Alright. Step 7, create a policy activator. We're just going to use the default. Step 8, start the policy activator, so it's green. Alright, so let's look at that. Services. Default policy activator, edit it. What we want to do here is put the policy that has our scheduler in it, which is the top act policy, right there. And we want to log it, service log, write to service log, save it. And then the policy logger, we are actually going to put in debug mode, and we're going to make sure we write service log, write to service log, and append policy name to log file. Those two things will help debug. Alright, we need to start it. You can either click that or you can click start. Start. Okay, now if we bring up the NC policy logger for simple policy and the NC underscore policy logger for top act policy. Let's tail this, and we can see right now the time is 12:10. So the time's about this time. Simple policy execute. Now, so it worked. Let's stop this. And let's go over a couple troubleshooting issues. Alright, so again, when it's running, I made those log statements so you can see that under the simple policy, the actual log statement gets written to the log, which is if you see this message, scheduler worked. And if you look under the top act policy log, you'll see that it ran the policy. And I showed you how to set up the policy logger for debugging. Top activator policy, you want to check and make sure that the data type is what you set in the first step during create a schedule. You called it the data type DT policy scheduler right here. And the key, which was set in step 5, is daily scheduled task right here. If you were to have mixed up those two variables, say you put the internal task, or in the key you put key simple policy, you'd see an error like this, where you'd get an exception for get schedule member. Another problem you'll see is if your get schedule member is set to null, that means that this on-call status is not green. In other words, the time is red. And if you don't put in this if-else statement, then you're going to see this error message when the time is not active. Let me show you an example of that. Stopping at 4 o'clock, which is 1600, and save it. So now the status is red, and that if-else statement's going to hit and say that there's no policy to run, right? To do that, we're going to run the service again. Start. Give it a minute. And let's clear that first. Make it easier to see. Tail, and no policy at this time because the time is not ready to active. And if we look at simple policy, the last time it ran was 12:11, and that concludes Netcool Impact 710, running a policy using a schedule. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.